chapter 14, section 4. There's going to be a lot of change come to Rome. Because of all of the new land and the wealth that they've gained, their economy is going to begin to change. Their government's going to begin to change. You're going to see their small farms turn into these large estates. You're going to see slaves begin to be used. You're going to see the movement from people from cities to farms. Really, you're going to start to see the decline of the Roman Republic. So let's start by looking at some of these agricultural changes that are going to happen. So originally, the norm was these small farms. The early Romans believed in hard work, in service to Rome. Many grew wheat for their food crop. But over time, what you're going to see is latifundias begin to replace these small farms. These latifundias were these large estates. They would produce crops, but they also raised sheep and cattle that they would sell at the market. Some would have olives that they would raise, some would have vineyards, which meant that the wheat was now being imported from places like Sicily and North Africa. And the thing that led to a lot of these changes was when Hannibal had invaded during the Punic Wars. While Hannibal's soldiers were in Italy, they lived off the land. The Romans didn't want Hannibal and his troops to have their food, so they used something called scorched earth tactics. I mean, they would burn the crops in the field so that way these invaders couldn't have them. These Roman farmers also made excellent soldiers. So a lot of these Roman farmers were gone to fight Carthage. So getting crops from other countries caused the price to fall. Many farmers couldn't make enough money to fix their farms after they've been burnt. Only the wealthy patricians really had money, so they're buying up all this land for cheap, and they combine it together to make these huge latifundias. Another thing you started seeing was Romans started using slavery. They had never really used it before, but they were impressed by the wealth that they had seen in Carthage, in Greece, in Syria. And all of those places used slavery. So the Romans began to take prisoners and send them back home to Rome and Italy to be slaves. And many are going to work and live on those latifundias. You're going to begin to see a lot of people moving to the cities. You couldn't own your farm anymore, and the work's being done by slaves, so you moved to the cities. You'd sold your broken land. So here you are in the city, but you're poor. The conditions were horrible for these farmers in the city. It was crowded. You had these wooden apartment buildings. The sewers weren't connected to your apartment buildings. The aqueducts to bring you clean water wasn't connected to your apartment building. Diseases like typhus would be common in these communities. Very few people could find jobs. The only real industry in Rome was construction. Slaves worked for most of the businesses. And so really the only way to make any money was to sell your votes to the politicians. These problems that you're beginning to see here, it's going to lead to the decline of the Roman Republic. You start seeing Rome change who they were. They begin making demands of the people that they had conquered. They demanded that they give them slaves. They demanded that they give them taxes. Publicans were these Roman tax collectors. The publicans, before they would leave Rome, they would pay Rome ahead of time. And so then they went out to collect taxes that they've already paid. So now they're collecting it. And according to law, they could not charge more than 10% above what they had already paid. But many publicans would charge much higher rates in taxes. So that way they made a lot of money on the side themselves. By 135 BC, Rome was in a lot of trouble. Um, Farmers had lost their land. Uh, Merchants were getting poorer. Romans were buying from other places, not from Roman merchants necessarily. You've got artisans losing their business, as people are buying art and materials and goods from Greece and Syria. You've got government officials that would rather get rich than solve any actual problems. And that gap between the rich and the poor was growing. The poor hated the rich hated the poor. The rich feared the poor because the poor were in much higher numbers. Basically, Rome had lost its political stability.